Have you ever walked past someone and only later realized that you never really saw them? You saw the cashier, but not the tired person behind the counter. You saw the employee who made the mistake, but not the person carrying a burden into work. You saw the impatient customer, but not the worry behind the frustration. You saw the person sitting quietly at your church community, or at work, or across the dinner table, but never wondered what might be going on inside their brain. Unfortunately, we can look directly at someone without truly seeing them. And that raises an important question for spiritual leadership. What would change if we learn to see people as Jesus sees them? Perhaps compassion begins there. Not with solving, not with fixing, not even with speaking, only with seeing. Welcome to the Listening Heart, folks. This is where we explore spiritual leadership and what it means to bring faith into the ordinary realities of business, work, and daily life. Now, before we go any further, I want to note that I use scripture stories to model and reflect God's love, compassion, forgiveness, justice, and mercy. Not in a particular religious sense, because we are all free to embrace God's love or not. But my belief, however, is that we are called to live out our own lives and stories in communion with God's unfolding love. And this, in today's reflection, I use stories about Jesus as examples of that love. Hi, I'm Richard Fontanie, and my journey has taken me through years of seminary life, leadership in the public sector, decades of consulting and training, and now into the evolving world of digital writing and podcasting. And through those very different chapters of my life, one lesson continues to return. Leadership ultimately involves people. And spiritual leadership asks us a deeper question. Not simply what are we accomplishing, but who are we becoming as we accomplish it? This week, across Fontanie magazine eLearning, our focus is on compassion and empathy. In our companion article, Empathy in Action, Real-World and Business Applications, we explored a simple idea. Compassion notices, empathy understands, and leadership acts. And that article is listed below in the description. And today, I want to take that idea further. Before compassion becomes an action, it becomes a way of seeing or recognizing others. When we read the Gospels carefully, something remarkable appears again and again. Jesus noticed people that others ignored, that others categorized or pushed toward the edges of society. Think about Bartimaeus, the blind beggar crying out as Jesus passed by. The crowd wanted him quiet, but Jesus stopped and listened to him. Think about Zacchaeus. Others saw a tax collector and sinner, and Jesus saw someone worth calling by name. Think about the woman at the well. The social barriers of those times could have ended the encounter before it began, but Jesus engaged her in conversation. And think about the crowds who followed him. Others could have seen an inconvenience, more people, more demands, more needs. But Jesus saw people who were weary and searching. Again and again, his compassion begins with attention. He sees, he listens, he recognizes the human person standing before him, and then he responds. That is where the gospel challenges us. Compassion is often inconvenient. It interrupts schedules. It complicates plans. It asks us to stop when we could otherwise continue. There is always another email to answer, another deadline approaching, another meeting to attend, or another task on the list. We become very efficient at moving through our days. But efficiency carries a spiritual danger when people begin to look like interruptions. Perhaps someone comes into your office and says, "Do you have a minute?" And you know what those words sometimes mean. It probably will not be a minute. Or someone calls just as you are preparing to do something else. A colleague needs help when your own workload is very heavy. Or maybe a family member wants to talk when you are tired. The question is not whether we can respond in every need, because we can't. The question is whether our first instinct is always convenience. Jesus shows another possibility. He allows himself to notice, listen, respect, and respond. Compassion asks us to look beyond seeing what is immediately visible. Someone may appear angry when underneath the anger is fear. May appear disengaged when underneath the silence is discouragement. Or may appear demanding when underneath the behavior is really uncertainty. And again, may appear confident while privately wondering whether they are good enough. We cannot know another person's heart completely, because that belongs to God. But we can resist the temptation to believe that what we see on the surface is the whole story. And that is where empathy enters into spiritual leadership. Empathy quietly asks, what might this person be experiencing that I can't see? And that question does not excuse harmful behavior. It does not eliminate accountability. It simply prevents us from reducing a human being to one behavior, one mistake, one opinion, or one difficult moment. Jesus continually saw beyond labels, and spiritual leadership asks us to learn that same discipline. Now, here's a pause for today. Think of someone you encounter regularly, perhaps a colleague, an employee, a customer, a neighbor, a friend, someone in your family, maybe even someone you find difficult. And hold that person quietly in your mind for a moment. Now ask yourself, what have I assumed about this person? And then ask a second question. What might I not know? You do not need to invent an explanation for their behavior. Simply allow the question to soften your certainty, because sometimes compassion begins when we become less certain about another person's story. Now, you might wonder, what has all of this got to do with business? Well, actually, quite a lot. Business exists to serve people. Customers are people. Employees are people. Suppliers are people. Partners are people. Even the numbers on a spreadsheet eventually represent human decisions, needs, and efforts, and consequences. Now, spiritual leadership does not ask us to turn the workplace into a religious setting. It asks us to bring our deepest values into the way we treat people, and that might mean listening carefully to a customer's complaint, rather than becoming defensive. It might mean noticing that a normally enthusiastic employee has become withdrawn. It might mean refusing to treat people merely as transactions. And it might mean asking not only what will increase the result, but also what is the right way to achieve that result. Now, the same principle applies to leadership within our workplaces. People perform better when expectations are clear. They also perform better when dignity is protected. And those two things belong together. Compassionate leadership doesn't mean lowering every standard whenever someone struggles. And sometimes the most caring thing a leader can do is have an honest conversation. But when we have that conversation, there is a difference between correction designed to humiliate and correction designed to help someone grow. There is a difference between "you failed" and "this did not meet our expectation. Let's understand what happened and determine what needs to change." The second approach still contains accountability, but it also contains hope. You know, most of us will not practice compassion dramatically. It will happen during our everyday encounters, such as a conversation, an email, a meeting, a telephone call, a moment at home, someone needing patience when we're running out, someone needing to be heard when we are tempted to provide an immediate answer, someone needing encouragement when it would be easier to stay or to say nothing. Now, these moments can appear insignificant, but faith teaches us that ordinary encounters can become places of grace. Perhaps that is one of the deepest lessons Jesus gives us about compassion. He did not simply teach people to love. He noticed the person who needed love in front of him. And that leads me into the second half of our conversation. Because seeing is only the beginning. The deeper invitation is to allow what we see to change how we live. After our coffee break, we'll explore how compassion can become a daily spiritual practice, one that strengthens leadership, deepens relationships, and creates healthier communities, and turns ordinary encounters into opportunities for grace. But before we continue, carry this question with you. Who might God be asking me to notice today? Now let's pause for a few moments and step away from the busyness of your life. Maybe you can fill your coffee or tea and reflect on how today's conversation meets your life. Now, before we break, I left you with one question. Who might God be asking me to notice today? It's an interesting question because the answer may not be someone far away. It may be the person in the next office or the next classroom, the customer on the telephone, the person sitting across from you at breakfast, someone whose name appears in your inbox, a family member you haven't contacted in a while, or perhaps the person you find most difficult to understand. We often imagine compassion as something extraordinary, but most compassion is remarkably ordinary. It begins when one human being pays attention to another. So as you enjoy your coffee, think about this. Who have I been seeing without really noticing? And perhaps that's where we begin our spiritual exercise and practice. Welcome back to The Listening Heart, folks. We often hear that compassion is described as a feeling, but feelings come and go, and there will be days when compassion arises naturally. Someone tells us their story and our heart immediately goes out to them. There will be days when we are tired, impatient, distracted, or preoccupied with our own concerns. And that, my friends, is what happened to me the other day. If compassion depicts how we feel, Jesus points out something quite different and deeper. Compassion can be a way of life. It becomes a habit of paying attention, a discipline of listening, a willingness to interpret our assumptions, and a commitment to respond to people with dignity. We might describe this practice very simply. See, listen, discern, and respond. First, see the person. Second, listen before assuming. Third, discern what is truly needed. And finally, respond with wisdom and love. Now, not every person needs the same response. One person may need encouragement. Another may need practical assistance. Another may need to be heard. And another may need honest correction. And finally, another may simply need someone to remain present. Compassion is not giving everyone what they want. It's learning to ask, what does love require in this instance? And that leads me to another important point. It's all about compassion with boundaries. This is especially important for leaders because compassion without wisdom can become unhealthy. We can't solve every problem. We can't carry every burden. And we can't say yes to every request. And we shouldn't protect people from every consequence of their decisions. Jesus was compassionate, but he was not controlled by every demand placed upon him. There were times when he withdrew, challenged people, spoke uncomfortable truths, and then moved on. Now, this reminds us that boundaries and compassion are not enemies. A leader can say, I understand what you are experiencing, as well as this expectation still needs to be met. A parent can love deeply and still say no. A business owner can care about a customer's frustration without agreeing to an unreasonable request. And a friend can support someone without taking responsibility for decisions that belong to that person. Healthy compassion respects all of these people. The person receiving compassion matters, and so does the person offering it. Now, there's another reason compassion belongs in leadership. It strengthens leadership. Now, people remember how leaders make them feel when they are vulnerable. Think about a time when you made a mistake. Perhaps you expected criticism. Instead, someone helped you learn from it. Think about a difficult season when someone quietly asked, "How are you doing?" and then stayed long enough to hear the real answer. Now, those moments build trust, and trust strengthens relationships, and strong relationships make honest conversations possible. This does not mean compassionate leaders avoid difficult decisions, and quite the opposite. When people know that a leader respects them, even challenging conversations can take on a different character. Correction can be developmental. Conflict can become learning. Uncertainty can become an invitation to work together. And compassion does not weaken leadership. It gives leadership a human face. Now let's bring this directly into our e-learning journey as it affects business, work, and life. In business, compassion begins by remembering that the person on the other side of the transaction has a story. So instead of asking only, how do I make the sale? Ask, how can I genuinely help? Instead of designing communication around pressure, design it around usefulness. Instead of seeing a complaint as an irritation, consider what it might teach you about the customer's experience. Compassion can be part of how a business serves. At work, compassion shapes culture. So let's look at when leaders set emotional patterns. When leaders listen, others learn to listen. When leaders treat mistakes as opportunities to learn, people become more willing to acknowledge problems early. And when leaders correct respectfully, dignity becomes part of workplace culture. And when leaders notice people, people begin noticing one another. And in life, compassion becomes even more personal. We sometimes give our best patience to others and to strangers, and our leftovers to the people that we love the most. The invitation is to bring the same attentive presence home. For instance, put down the device. Look at the person speaking. Ask another question. Listen to the answer. And do not rush immediately toward advice. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is undivided attention. Now, here are 3 simple ways to bring compassion to life this week. First, notice one person. Look for someone you might normally overlook. Learn their name if you don't know it. Ask how they're doing and pay attention to what they're saying. Second, listen without fixing. During one conversation this week, resist the temptation to immediately offer advice. Ask, what would you like me to listen? Or would it help to think through the possibilities together? And that simple question respects the other person's needs. Third, choose one compassionate action. Send an encouraging message. Thank someone whose contribution often goes unnoticed. Offer appropriate help. Make time for a conversation. Forgive a minor irritation, or simply become more patient. Compassion grows through practice. Now, one of the lessons life continues to teach me is that we rarely know the full story another person carries. Titles do not tell us. Appearances do not tell us. A cheerful smile does not always tell us. And neither does a difficult attitude. Through many years of working with people in different settings, I have found that listening often reveals something assumptions never could. And perhaps this is one of the reasons the listening heart matters so much to me. Listening is not merely a communication technique. At its best, listening says, for these few moments, you matter enough for me to pay attention. And that can be deeply compassionate act. Now here's today's learning lens. Compassion begins when we learn to see the person before we see the problem. Jesus noticed people. He saw him beyond labels. He responded to the human heart. And he invites us to develop that same way of seeing. This week, when someone frustrates you, disappoints you, interrupts you, or simply crosses your path, try asking, what might I not know? And then listen. You may discover that the situation looks different when viewed through compassionate eyes. Now, as we close, remember to carry this week's journey. Compassion notices, empathy understands, leadership acts. But the Christian invitation takes us one step further. We are called not simply to perform compassionate acts, but gradually to become compassionate people. People who notice, and people who listen, people who recognize dignity, and people who know when to help, when to encourage, when to challenge, and sometimes when to simply to remain present. We will not do this perfectly, but every encounter gives us another opportunity to practice. Our prayer this week can be very simple. Lord, help me see the people around me with your eyes. Give me the patience to listen, the wisdom to understand, and the courage to respond with compassion. And then let's pay attention to who appears before us, because an ordinary encounter may become an extraordinary opportunity for grace. Now, this week, our journey began with the Leadership Companion as it explored empathy in action for real-world business applications. And today, the Listening Heart has taken us beneath the practice to its spiritual foundation, learning to see with Jesus' eyes. And next, Coaching Talks takes compassion directly into performance leadership with practicing compassion and empathy, and fostering strong human connections. And in that broadcast, we'll explore how emotionally intelligent leaders create workplaces where people feel understood and respected. And then Digital Marketing Secrets will carry the same principle into our online relationships through compassion and digital content, empathy-driven messaging. And it all collapses into one journey with 4 dimensions. The Leadership Companion introduces us to the journey. Spiritual leadership helps us see differently. Performance leadership helps us lead differently. And digital leadership helps us communicate differently. And together, they remind us that leadership begins with the human person and the human heart. Next week, our journey expands our discussion. We'll explore working across cultures and leading in a diverse world. And here on the Listening Heart, I'll explore every nation, one spirit, the call to unity in diversity. And we'll discover what our faith teaches us about encountering people whose cultures, traditions, backgrounds, and experiences may be different from our own. Until then, keep listening, keep noticing, keep learning. And when you encounter another person this week, remember, you may not know their whole story, but you can still choose to meet them with compassion. I'm Richard Fontanie, signing off. See you next week, if not before, and bye now.